Come on, Bob. Come on, David, go and grab a seat. When you're ready, we'll start. Order! I call the Prime Minister to make a statement. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I'll make a statement on the government's measures to safeguard our United Kingdom against the new variants of COVID, until we've administered enough vaccinations to free ourselves from the virus. And I'm acutely conscious that at this moment, parents are balancing the demands of working from home with supporting the education of their children. Business people are enduring the sight of their shops or restaurants or other enterprises standing empty and idle. And sadly, too many are coping with the anxiety of illness or the tragedy of bereavement. And I'm deeply sorry to say that the number of people that have been taken from us has surpassed 100,000, as the House was discussing only an hour or so ago. And I know that the House will join me in offering condolences to all those who have lost loved ones. The most important thing we can do to honour their memory is to persevere against this virus with ever greater resolve. And that's why we've launched the biggest vaccination programme in British history. 3 weeks ago, I reported that the UK had immunised 1.3 million people. Now that figure has multiplied more than fivefold to exceed 6.8 million people, more than any other country in Europe, and over 13% of the entire adult population. In England, we've now delivered first doses to over 4/5 of those aged 80 or over, and over half of those aged between 75 and 79, and 3/4 of elderly care home residents. And though it remains an exacting target, we are on track to achieve our goal of offering a first dose to everyone in the top 4 priority groups by the middle of February. I can also reassure the House that all current evidence shows that both the vaccines we are administering remain effective against the new variant that was first identified in London and the South East by means of our world-leading capability in genomic sequencing. The UK has now sequenced over half of all COVID-19 viral genomes that have been submitted to the global database, 10 times more than any other country. And yesterday, my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, announced our new variant assessment platform, through which we will work with the World Health Organization to offer our expertise to help other countries. Because a new variant anywhere poses a potential threat everywhere. To guard against this danger, we must also take additional steps to strengthen our borders to stop those strains from entering the UK. We've already temporarily closed all travel corridors, and we're already requiring anyone coming into this country to have proof of a negative COVID test taken in the 72 hours before leaving. They must also complete a passenger locator form, which must be checked before they board and then quarantine on arrival for 10 days. I want to make clear that under the stay-at-home regulations, it is illegal to leave home to travel abroad for leisure purposes. And we will enforce this at ports, at airports, by asking people why they are leaving and instructing them to return home if they do not have a valid reason to travel. We have also banned all travel from 22 countries where there is a risk of known variants, including South Africa, Portugal, and South American nations. And in order to reduce the risk posed by UK nationals and residents returning home from these countries, I can announce that we will require all such arrivals who cannot be refused entry to isolate in government-provided accommodation, such as hotels, for 10 days without exception. They will be met at the airport and transported directly into quarantine. The Department for Health and Social Care is working to establish these facilities as quickly as possible. And my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, will set out the details of our plans in her statement shortly. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, has this morning spoken to the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales and the First and Deputy First Ministers of Northern Ireland. And as we have throughout this pandemic, we will be working closely with the DAs to implement these new measures so that where possible, we continue with a UK-wide approach. Mr. Speaker, it was the emergence of a new variant, up to 70% more transmissible, that forced England back into lockdown. And I know everyone yearns to know how much longer we must endure these restrictions, with all their consequences for jobs, livelihoods, and most tragically of all, the life chances of our children. we will not persist for a day longer than is necessary, but nor can we relax too soon. Because if we do, we run the risk of our NHS coming under still greater pressure, compelling us to reimpose every restriction and sustain those restrictions for longer. So far, our efforts do appear to have reduced the R rate, but we do not yet have enough data to know exactly how soon it will be safe to reopen our society and economy. At this point, we don't have enough data to judge the full effect of vaccines in blocking transmission, nor the extent and speed with which the vaccines will reduce hospitalizations and deaths, nor how quickly the combination of vaccinations and the lockdown can be expected to ease the pressure on the NHS. What we do know is that we remain in a perilous situation, with more than 37,000 patients now in hospital with COVID, almost double the peak of the first wave. But the overall picture should be clearer by mid-February. By then, we will know much more about the effect of vaccines in preventing hospitalizations and deaths, using data from the UK, but also other nations like Israel. We will know how successful the current restrictions have been in driving down infections. We will also know how many people are still in hospital with COVID, which we simply can't predict with certainty today. So we will then be in a better position to chart a course out of lockdown without risking a further surge that would overwhelm the NHS. When I announced the lockdown, I said we would review its measures in mid-February once the most vulnerable had been offered the first dose of the vaccine. So I can tell the House that when Parliament returns from recess in the week commencing the 22nd of February, subject to the full agreement of the House, Mr. Speaker, we intend to set out the results of that review and publish our plan for taking the country out of lockdown. That plan will, of course, depend on the continued success of our vaccination programme, the capacity of the NHS, and on deaths falling at the pace we would expect as more people are inoculated. Our aim will be to set out a gradual and phased approach towards easing the restrictions in a sustainable way, guided by the principles we've observed throughout the pandemic, beginning with the most important principle of all, that reopening schools must be our national priority. And the first sign of normality beginning to return should be pupils going back to their classrooms. I know how parents and teachers need as much certainty as possible, including 2 weeks' notice of the return of face-to-face teaching. So I must inform the House that for the reasons I have outlined, it will not be possible to reopen schools immediately after the February half-term. And I know how frustrating that will be for pupils and teachers who want nothing more than to get back to the classroom, and for parents and for carers who've spent so many months juggling their day jobs, not only with homeschooling, but with meeting the myriad other demands of their children from breakfast until bedtime. And I know too the worries we all share about the mental health of our young people during this prolonged period of being stuck at home. So our plan for leaving the lockdown will set out our approach towards reopening schools. If we achieve our target of vaccinating everyone in the four most vulnerable groups with their first dose by the 15th of February, and every passing day sees more progress towards that goal, then those groups that have developed immunity from the virus about 3 weeks later, that is by the 8th of March. We hope it will therefore be safe to begin the reopening of schools from Monday, the 8th of March, with other economic and social restrictions being removed thereafter as and when the data permits. Then or thereafter, I should say, Mr. Speaker. As we're extending the period of remote learning beyond the middle of February, I can confirm that the government will prolong arrangements for providing free school meals for those eligible children not in school, including food parcels and the national voucher scheme, until they've returned to the classroom. We can also commit now that as we did this financial year, we will provide a programme of catch-up over the next financial year. And this will involve a further £300 million of new money to schools for tutoring. And we will work in collaboration with the education sector to develop, as appropriate, specific initiatives for summer schools and a COVID premium to support catch-up. But we recognise that these extended school closures have had a huge impact on children's learning, which will take more than a year to make up. So we will work with parents, teachers and schools to develop a long-term plan to make sure pupils have the chance to make up their learning over the course of this Parliament. I know, Mr. Speaker, that the measures I'm setting out today will be deeply frustrating to many honourable friends and colleagues and disappointing for all of us. But the way forward has been clear ever since the vaccines arrived. And as we inoculate more people hour by hour, this is the time to hold our nerve in the end game of the battle against the virus. And our goal now must be to buy the extra weeks we need to immunise the most vulnerable and get this virus under control so that together we can defeat this most wretched disease, reclaim our lives once and for all. And Mr. Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
I'm now going to call the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer, who is participating virtually. Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement. Mr. Speaker, to lose 100,000 people to this virus is nothing short of a national tragedy. It is a stark number, an empty chair at the kitchen table, a person obviously taken before their time. And today, we should remember that. And we should mark the moment by learning the lessons of the last year to make sure that the same mistakes are not made again. Of course, any government would have struggled with this pandemic. I get that. The British people get that. But the reality is that Britain is the first country in Europe to suffer 100,000 deaths. And we have one of the highest death rates in the world. And the Prime Minister often says that he's been balancing the health restrictions against economic risks. But that simply doesn't wash, because alongside that high death toll, we also have the deepest recession of any major economy, the lowest growth of any major economy, and we're on course to have one of the slowest recoveries of any major economy. So for all the contrition and sympathy that the Prime Minister expresses, and I recognise how heartfelt that is, the truth is this was not inevitable. It wasn't just bad luck. It's the result of a huge number of mistakes by the Prime Minister during the course of this pandemic. We were too slow into lockdown last March, too slow to get protective equipment to the front line, and of course too slow to protect our care homes. Mr. Speaker, 20% of deaths in this pandemic have come from care home residents, 20%. And I really don't think that the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary understand just how offensive it was to pretend that there was a protective ring around our care homes. The government had the chance over the summer to learn from those mistakes in the first wave and prepare for a second wave and a challenging winter. I put that challenge to the Prime Minister in June, but that chance was wasted. The government then went on to fail to deliver an effective test, trace and isolate system, despite all of the warnings. They failed to deliver clear and reliable public messaging, crucial in a pandemic. 1 minute telling people to go to work, then to do the complete opposite. And the Prime Minister has failed on a number of occasions to follow the scientific advice that the virus was getting out of control. First in September, when that advice was given, and the failure to implement a circuit break or lockdown over half term as we suggested. Then in December with the fiasco over Christmas mixing. And once again, in the 13-day delay from December 22nd, when that further medical advice was given and the third national lockdown was finally introduced. As a result, we've seen a third wave more deadly than the first and second waves. Mr. Speaker, 50,000 people have died since November the 11th. 50,000 deaths in 77 days. That's a scarcely believable toll on the British people. Now, in isolation, any of these mistakes are perhaps understandable. Taken together, it's a damning indictment of how the government has handled this pandemic. The Prime Minister says, well, now is not the time to answer the question why. That's the answer he gave back in the summer after the first wave, that then was not the time to answer why. He said the same after the second wave. And he says it again now, each time repeating the mistakes over and over again. That's why now is the time to ask and answer the question why. The way out of this nightmare has now been provided by our amazing scientists, our NHS, our armed forces, and hundreds of thousands of volunteers. The vaccine programme is making incredible progress. The British people have come together to deliver what is the largest peacetime effort in our history. And despite the Prime Minister's constant complaining, all of us are doing whatever we can to help that vaccine roll out as swiftly and as safely as possible. On schools, first I have to say, even for this Prime Minister, it's quite something to open schools one day, close them the next, to call them vectors of transmission, and then to challenge me to say that the schools he's closed are safe. Only now to give a statement where he says that schools can't open until the 8th of March at the earliest because it's not safe to do so. That's his analysis. It's the sort of nonsense that's led us to the highest death toll in Europe and the worst recession. But of course we welcome any steps forward in reopening schools. And we're going to look at the detail of how the Education Secretary plans to deliver this and the plans to deliver online learning. And I also hope the Prime Minister will take seriously our proposal, echoed incidentally by the Children's Commissioner and the Conservative Chair of the Education Select Committee, that once the first 4 categories of the most vulnerable have been vaccinated by mid-February, he should bring forward the vaccination of key workers and use that window of the February half term to vaccinate all school staff, including every teacher and teaching assistant. There's a clear week there when that could be done, and it should be done. On borders, we'll look at the detail.
Order. I've got to say, I hope the right honourable gentleman's coming to the end is well past the 5 minutes that's allocated.
Mr. Speaker, on borders, Mr. Speaker, we'll look at the Prime Minister's statement in detail and obviously hear what the Home Secretary has to say. But Mr. Speaker, in due course, there will be a public inquiry and the Prime Minister will have to answer questions. But I hope that he can finally answer this very simple and direct question. Because yesterday, the Prime Minister was maintaining the government had done, his words, everything we could to save lives. So is he really saying to those grieving families that their loss was just inevitable and that none of the 100,000 deaths could have been avoided? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if the right honourable gentleman asks about mistakes, and I've said there will be a time to reflect and to analyse, to learn lessons and to prepare. But I may say to him that I believe the biggest mistake that he has made is in seeking continually to attack what the government has been trying to do at every opportunity, supporting one week and then attacking the very same policy the next week. And he complains about confusion of messages, Mr. Speaker. How much has he actually done as Leader of the Opposition to reassure the public, for instance, about NHS test and trace, which has done a very good job, I notice, of confining him for the third time. What has he done to reassure people about messaging rather than attacking confusion and trying to sow doubt about what the government is doing? I think there was a very different path open to him at the beginning of this pandemic, and I think it's a great pity that he hasn't taken it. If I may say so, on schools, Mr. Speaker, he knows perfectly well that the problem is not that schools are unsafe. They are not unsafe. Schools are safe, and he should say it. And his union paymasters should hear him say it loud and clear. The problem is that, Mr. Speaker, that they bring communities together. Obviously, large numbers of kids are a considerable vector of transmission. It's not that there's any particular extra risk, Mr. Speaker, to those involved in education. And I heard with interest what he had to say about his proposal for changing the JCVI priority list. And I really think that the Right Honourable Gentleman should reflect on what he is saying. Because the JCVI priority list, 1 to 9, is designed by experts, by clinicians, to prioritise, Mr. Speaker, those groups who are most likely to die or to suffer from coronavirus. And by trying to change that and saying that he wants now to bring in other groups of public sector workers to be decided by politicians rather than by the JCVI, he has to explain which vaccines he would take from which vulnerable groups, Mr. Speaker, to make sense of his policy, because that is what he is doing. And that is what the Labour proposal would involve. And indeed, by making it more difficult for us to vaccinate all those vulnerable groups in the fastest possible way, Mr. Speaker, that policy, that Labour policy, would actually delay our route out of lockdown, delay our ability to get kids back into school in the way that they want. So I urge him to think again, or at least to explain which members of those vulnerable groups would be deprived of vaccines in order to follow the Labour policy. And all I can say, Mr. Speaker, having listened carefully to what the Honourable Gentleman had to say, is that everybody will have to answer questions at the end of this. And I think all politicians, let me put it this way, all politicians will be asked what they did, what we did, collaboratively, working together for the people of our country to beat this virus. And I'm not sure that upon reflection, the Right Honourable Gentleman's choice was the right one, either for his party or the country.
Let's head to Surrey, to the Chair of the Select Committee, Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, Baroness Harding said that 40% of the people asked to self-isolate by NHS Test and Trace weren't fully doing so, which works out at a worrying 30,000 people every single day who are potentially still spreading the virus, many of them still going to work. Because this is such a big threat to our containment strategy for the virus, I wonder if the Prime Minister could say what he thinks we need to do to deal with this, and in particular, whether it is now time to consider making a blanket offer to those asked to self-isolate that we will make good any salary they lose, because in the end that may be cheaper than having to extend furlough if the case rate remains high.
I very much respect my right honourable friend's suggestion, and I understand the logic of what he is saying. But I believe that the people of this country should be isolating, self-isolating in the way that the Right Honourable General Leader of the Opposition is rightly doing, on the basis that it's the right thing for themselves, for their families and for the country. They do get support where needed of £500, and there are very considerable fines for failing to do it. And I think that is the right way forward, and I hope he will join me in commending prompt action by everybody who is asked to self-isolate. It's the right thing to do for you, for your family and for the country.
Let's head up to Scotland, to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and let me thank the Prime Minister for an advanced copy of his statement. Mr. Speaker, as we know, yesterday the UK reached yet another terrible milestone, 100,000 COVID-related deaths. Today, it is only right that we reflect on all of those who have lost their lives during this pandemic, and our thoughts and prayers are most especially with their families, those who are left with the heaviest burden of grief. In time, there will be a reckoning on the UK government's response to this virus. And it's clear that that verdict may well be damning. In the here and now, though, it remains our job to focus on how we can support and save as many people as possible in the weeks and months ahead. That means a renewed commitment to maintaining public health, but it also must mean a renewed package of financial support for all of those Prime Ministers who've been left behind by this Tory government. Right now, COVID is the immediate threat to life, but poverty remains a killer too. In 2019, the IPPR revealed that Tory austerity cuts over the previous decade had resulted in as many as 130,000 preventable deaths. The Prime Minister promised not to repeat Tory austerity. If people are to believe him, then he should start by making three important announcements today. Extend the furlough scheme for the full duration of the pandemic, maintain the uplift to universal credit and apply it to legacy benefits, and put in place a package of support for the 3 million included. Prime Minister, 11th hour announcements have got to stop. These decisions can't wait until the budget in March. People need certainty now. I asked the Prime Minister these same questions at Prime Minister's Questions, but failed to get a straight answer. So please try again, Prime Minister. Will his government extend furlough, maintain the universal credit uplift, and offer support for the 3 million excluded? And finally, Mr. Speaker, on international travel. Both the Scottish and Welsh governments want to go further on quarantining measures than what his UK government is proposing. Will the Prime Minister stop his half measures and enjoin the governments in Scotland and Wales in stricter enforcements on international travel? That, Prime Minister, would be leadership.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to what the devolved administrations do later, but I can tell the House that we're putting in the toughest measures of virtually anywhere in the world, and my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, will be setting out the detail in due course. And I can tell him that this country, through the might of the UK Treasury, as my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has said many times, has been able to look after people across the UK. It's thanks to the UK government that we have the furlough scheme, the bounce back loans, the many other forms of support. And it's thanks to the UK that we have, for instance, the Army able to move people in distress with COVID in remote parts of Scotland to the hospitals where they need to get to. And indeed, the British Army helping across Scotland, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to say, to distribute the vaccines that are so essential for our fight back from this virus. So I hope that he will abandon his nationalist position, narrow nationalist position, and look at the achievements of the UK overall. And I think it is a fine thing. It'd be a wonderful thing, by the way, if the Scottish Nationalist Party, for a moment, would stop talking about their desire for a referendum, Mr. Speaker, while we are trying to deal with a pandemic.
David Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister is very properly concerned to protect our National Health Service, and particularly to prevent hospitals and intensive care units being overwhelmed this winter. My question is about the scope to enhance primary care to reduce the need for COVID patients to go to hospital in the first place. New Canadian studies published this week, 4,500 people, show the use of colchicine has cut hospital admissions by 25% and death rates by almost half. Similarly, ivermectin studies, some of them have shown 75% reductions in death rates. What scope is there to act quickly to enhance our primary care level to protect populations and hospitals this winter? This winter, not next winter.
I can tell my right honourable friend he makes a very important point, and that the Therapeutics Task Force is currently reviewing both the drugs that he mentions, and I'll make sure that he is kept up to speed with their findings.
Let's head to Sir Ed Davey. Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, as of 6:30 p.m. yesterday, the UK has the worst recorded death rate by head of population in the world. This is a grave moment for our country. I'm sure all our hearts go out to the families who have lost loved ones. Last week, the Prime Minister told me he was still not prepared to launch the inquiry into the COVID crisis that he promised 6 months ago. So instead today, will he at least tell the country that he will launch this inquiry sometime this year, so we can find out why our country has seen the worst death rates from COVID in the world, learn the lessons, and give bereaved families the answers and the justice he owes them.
Mr. Speaker, once again, Madam Deputy Speaker, once again, the right honourable gentleman has the answer contained in his question, because this country is going through a very grievous bout of a deadly pandemic. He rightly draws attention to the death toll of 100,000, and as he knows, there are currently 37,000 people in hospital, and the entire British state is working flat out to bring that virus under control and to get us through this pandemic and out the other side. And now is, as I've told him before, not the right time to consecrate the energies and efforts of officialdom. It would be huge to an inquiry, though, as I have said before, I said last night, and I'll reassure him again today, yes, of course, there will be a time to learn lessons, to reflect, and to understand, and to prepare, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Now we go to Richard Drax.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome and thank my right honourable friend for his upbeat statement, which offers much needed hope to a beleaguered nation, rather contrary to Captain Hindsight's contribution. With the successful inoculation programme in full swing, his plan to break free from lockdowns and restrictions is critical. Variants or no variants, does my right honourable friend agree that the lives and livelihoods of millions of our citizens now depend on a more proportionate response to this pandemic, which will require political courage to initiate?
Mr. Speaker, I very much respect the point of view of my honourable friend, who has long been a keen and justified campaigner for liberty, and I share his instincts very strongly. But I must tell him that we will continue to be cautious in our approach, because we do not wish to see more lives lost than we can possibly avoid, Mr. Speaker. And so that's why what we will do is continue with the rollout of the vaccine programme, the fastest in Europe, and currently, and on February the 15th, as I just said to the House, we will look at where we are, and we will be setting out a roadmap, which I hope will be useful to him and to all colleagues throughout the House on February the 22nd.
And now we go to Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank the Prime Minister. Would the Prime Minister confirm what discussions have taken place with his counterparts in education to give ample time for teachers to either plan their online teaching with special reference to children who cannot or will not be able to access their online classes? I agree with the Prime Minister. I think it's better that the children are back in their classrooms. But can the Prime Minister ensure that all the teaching staff, especially the special needs teachers, will be a priority for the vaccine rollout? And can he also confirm that there will be no shortage of vaccine, as was indicated on the press today? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, forgive me. We're rolling out 1.3 million laptops. We're making sure that pupils have access to online learning wherever possible. But the most important thing is, as the right honourable gentleman has rightly said, is get kids back in school as soon as we sensibly can. That's what this government is determined to do. I want to reassure him about the vaccination programme. He mentioned anxieties about supply. As I stand before you today, Madam Deputy Speaker, I am confident that we'll deliver on the February the 15th pledge, and that we'll continue to be able to drive up. I see my honourable friend who the Minister for the vaccine rollout, confirming that we will be able to continue that accelerating curve of supply as well.
Christian Wakefoot.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I join with members from across the House in sending my deepest of condolences to each and every one of the individuals who's tragically passed away as a result of COVID. However, during this extremely difficult time, I have nothing but admiration for the army of volunteers working tirelessly in my constituency and across the country. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking organisations like the Fed, Jewish Volunteering Network, Heads Up and Porch Boxers, along with all those who've done so much to protect the vulnerable and the needy in Prestwich, Radcliffe and Whitefield?
Mr. Speaker, I will indeed join my honourable friend in paying tribute to those volunteers in his constituency. They join a huge constellation of shining points of light across our country. It's been one of the most extraordinary things, one of the consolations, one of the few consolations of this crisis has been the upsurge, Madam Deputy Speaker, there has been in volunteering.
Now we go to Debbie Abrams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I also associate my remarks with others and express my sincerest condolences to everyone who's lost a loved one, and particularly the constituents who I spoke with last night. Madam Deputy Speaker, Professor Sir Michael Marmot's recent report pointed to 4 drivers which have contributed to the high and unequal death toll in the UK. He identified the governance and political culture which has damaged social cohesion and inclusivity, the widening inequalities in power, money and resources, the regressive austerity policies over the last 10 years, and the declining life expectancy and healthy life expectancy of the poorest, particularly women, which is amongst the worst of all comparable economies. Professor Marmot has called for the government to address these issues and to build back fairer. So will the Prime Minister and his cabinet listen to him?
I have a very high regard, Madam Deputy Speaker, for Michael Marmot and worked closely with him for many years. And I believe his advice is invaluable, and we will indeed be making sure that as we come through this pandemic, we look at the way it has impacted on the poorest and the most vulnerable. And indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, we will build back fairer.
And now we go to James Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The vaccine rollout now offers hope and relief to vulnerable people who have spent months living in fear and in isolation. To hear that 6.8 million vaccines have now been delivered is an amazing achievement, and I thank everyone involved in this rollout. The mass vaccination hubs are an important part of the scheme, but many of my constituents with mobility issues are worried they're going to miss out on their vaccine because they can't make the journey to one of these larger hubs. Could the Prime Minister give them reassurance that they will be offered a vaccine locally or even in their own homes, and anyone unable to travel will be fully supported?
The Honourable Lady raises a very important point, and I hope she will give this reassurance to her constituents that they need to have no anxieties about that. They don't have to go to the vaccination centres. They can either go to their GP surgeries or indeed they will be visited in their own home.
Now we go to Julie Elliott.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I add my condolences to those already expressed to the victims, their families and friends of this awful illness. One of the challenges children and adults working from home, the time now for children extended today by the Prime Minister, in addition to devices and connectivity, is the lack of digital skills. This week, I was made aware of an online scam asking people to put their financial information into a very plausible fake NHS website in order to get the vaccine. What is the Prime Minister doing to tackle this criminal activity, preying on often vulnerable people waiting for the vaccine? And also, what is the Prime Minister doing to ensure that individuals, young and old, have the digital skills they need to protect themselves, learn from home and work from home?
The Honourable Lady is absolutely right about the importance of digital skills, and of connectivity, and that's why we're massively increasing, for instance, gigabit broadband across the country, superfast broadband, and making sure that people have the technology that they need. She raises a particularly important point about online scams, and these are a problem. And I can tell her that we're working across government to beat these fraudsters, to root them out, led by the Cabinet Office. And if she'd be kind enough to send me details of the case that she mentions, we will feed it into our system immediately.
Now we go to Greg Clark.
Hi.
Do we have the sound working for Mr. Clark?
What's going on? Hello, Greg.
Apologise to the honourable member that the system, we appear to be hearing the sound engineers. Perhaps we will leave that for a moment. We'll come back to the honourable member for Tunbridge Wells, and meanwhile we'll go to York, hopefully to Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The evidence shows that the government's approach to easing the lockdown before Christmas meant that crowds of people came to York, despite my warnings, spreading the infection in the retail, hospitality and transport sectors because they could travel to a lower tier and were off guard in my community. The result has been devastating. It was completely unsafe and completely avoidable. Will the Prime Minister commit not to return to a tiered system where people can freely move the infection from one place to another? What steps will he take to avoid this catastrophe from happening again? And can I meet with one of his ministers to discuss York's tragic experience over Christmas?
Madam Deputy Speaker, as soon as we were informed of the extra transmissibility, 50 to 70% faster of the new variant, we took all the action that we could. And I would just remind the honourable lady that the best thing we can do for the people of York now is to make sure that we keep this virus under control and with the measures that we are, the tough measures that we have, and that we all come forward for the vaccine. I would urge her to get her constituents to come forward and take that vaccine. They're going great guns in Yorkshire. I think my memory is in Yorkshire, I think they're taking more vaccine than virtually anywhere else in the country. And I congratulate the people of Yorkshire on what they're doing. But we're now coming into the last furlong of the JCVI 1 to 4, and it would be great to get 100% of the people of Yorkshire in the course of the next few days.
Now we go to my esteemed constituency neighbour, Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In all the gloom of the tragedy of COVID, will my right honourable friend pay tribute to the staff and volunteers working so hard to scale up the programme of vaccinations in Harlow and delivering the life-saving vaccine to thousands of residents in our new mass vaccination centre? I know he wants schools and colleges to open sooner rather than later, and I really welcome what he has said today about catch up, the extra funding, free school meals, and above all, the education plan for a COVID recovery. Will he ensure the catch-up fund also helps children with mental health problems? And will he work with a coalition of the willing, such as the Children Commissioner and other educationalists, to get all our children back in the classroom?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. I join my right honourable friend in congratulating the volunteers, not just the NHS, the Army and the pharmacies, but the volunteers who are making the vaccine rollout possible. And yes, I can tell my right honourable friend that we are putting extra funding into mental health problems, particularly for children and young people. And the funding that we've announced every year of more than 2 billion extra, 3 billion extra, Mr. Speaker, I think will go to help 345,000 children as well.
And now we go to Judith Cummins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. ONS data shows that key workers and those in manual and public-facing jobs are at the highest risk of dying from coronavirus. Bradford is a key worker city, and tragically, over 1,000 Bradfordians have now died from the virus. When the most vulnerable groups have been vaccinated, will the Prime Minister ensure that priority is then given to frontline workers who have played such a key role in keeping the country going during the pandemic, often with a high risk to their personal safety, including police officers, teachers, shop workers, bus and taxi drivers, and many others who are just unable to work from home? So when will he publish his plan for the next stage of the vaccine rollout?
Can I just congratulate the Honourable Lady for being so much more sensible than her party leader, who was saying that he wants to interrupt the vaccine rollout for the vulnerable groups, Madam Deputy Speaker, and decide politically to who should get the vaccine. I think we should leave it to the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation for the JCVI to do to decide the most vulnerable groups. That's what we're going to do. That's the fastest way to deal with those who are most likely to die. I see she's shaking her head. She perhaps disagrees with the suggestion that she's just made, but I think that it's an excellent suggestion.